Hi, this is Sarit Switzer, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast, a podcast devoted to the teachings of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi as recorded in his most famous work, the Tanya. My hope for this show is to make these teachings accessible and relatable to the average person, regardless of prior Jewish education or affiliation. The episodes follow the prescribed daily study portions and are meant to serve as practical lessons in how to live your life as your true self and develop an authentic and powerful relationship with your Creator. I have personally experienced the effects the study of this work has had on me, and I'm excited to share what I can of this knowledge with you. So please join me on this journey of learning, self-growth, and connection with your source. Hi, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast. This is episode 711 for the 19th of Cheshvan in a regular year. Today we are going to talk about sunglasses, something all of us kind of take for granted, right? So we all know that looking at the sun directly is harmful to our eyes, and we put on sunglasses and it makes it all better. But how do sunglasses actually work? What's going on? So what sunglasses are doing is two main things. They are reflecting certain light away from the glass so as to protect us from the overpowering rays of the sun or any rays like UV rays that might be harmful to us. But they're also absorbing light. They're allowing certain light to come in. So sunglasses, basically in short, serve as a certain filter to allow us to receive the sunlight in a non-harmful way. So it's useful to think of sunglasses in this way as being a filter as opposed to glasses which block the sunlight, because they don't block all of the sunlight. They actually allow us to receive the sunlight, to see the sunlight. So why are we talking about sunglasses, and what does this have to do with the Tanya? So what we're going to be learning about today is that in Judaism, we actually have a parallel, an equivalent to sunglasses that allow us to receive the light of God in a similar fashion, and that those sunglasses, believe it or not, are the mitzvos that God gave us, are the commandments that God gave us. So the way that this works, and we'll delve into this in a deeper way when we get into the text, is that the mitzvahs, the commandments, they are actually made up of God's will. So they actually are made up of pure godliness. But the way that they are formed, like the details of the mitzvahs, serve as a way that is accessible to us. It's like a filter. They serve as a filter of sorts that allow us to receive God's radiance in a way that we won't expire, in a way that's accessible to us, that's palatable to us. Which is something that's unique to the mitzvahs, by the way. So it's like when we think about Judaism, we can really say that Judaism and our relationship with God can be divided up into two categories. There's Torah and mitzvahs, right? And they're two different things. They're very related, obviously, but they are two different things. So so Torah, as we've talked about many times on the podcast, Torah is the wisdom of God. It's the mind of God. It's God's intelligence, so to speak. And this is, when we study Torah, we're tapping into God's mind. And God's mind, in fact, is a very powerful thing. It's the basis of all of creation. It's where everything comes from, the origin of everything. But then there's the will of God. The will of God is the mitzvahs. And the will, if you've been following along and understanding kind of like the map of the spheros at this point, like the map of spiritual reality, will actually comes from a place that's higher than wisdom. When a person wants something, they sometimes want it in a way that surpasses intellect. There's not like a logical reason for what they want. They just want it. It sort of like taps into the essence of their soul. Similarly with God, God's will is something very essential to him. And God's will is epitomized through the mitzvahs, the commandments that God gave us, that God tells us what to do, what not to do. The Jewish law, that is God's express will. That's the expression of God's essence. So when we do God's commandments, or when we learn about God's commandments, we're tapping into his essence. And these mitzvahs, as we'll learn, serve as sunglasses to allow us to tap into God's essence in a way that we won't expire, in a way that can be accessible to us. Just like we can't look at the sun directly, even though the sun is pretty much responsible for our lives and for so much of the world. But yet looking at it directly would, and it's responsible for us seeing color. It's responsible for really everything we see around us. But yet we can't look at it directly. It would be too much for us. We need those sunglasses in order to experience it. So with all of this in mind, we can come to understand the greatness of the mitzvahs and the greatness of studying the commandments of the Torah, and why there's this like really high value that's given to studying specifically the mitzvahs, and how the mitzvahs are actually called the crown of the Torah that surrounds the Torah. And how, even though in a more manifest way, it can seem as if like the Torah is on top, the Torah is the one leading the show. Ultimately, we know that in the future, it's going to be revealed that the mitzvahs are going to surround the Torah like a crown. And the mitzvahs actually, interestingly, are likened to the woman, or likened to the wife, whereas Torah is likened to the husband. And this parallels the fact that in our world right now, in this state of exile that we live in, we know everybody talks about the patriarchy, toxic masculinity, that kind of stuff. All of that is a reflection of exile, and the fact that like men are in a position more of power in this state of exile. But in the times of Mashiach, it's actually going to be revealed that the women are the ones that are on top. The women are the ones that are more powerful and come from a higher spiritual place. So just a little bit of feminism to add in there. So with all of that in mind, let's get into the text and see how the Alter Rebbe explains this in his words. And for context, we are beginning a new epistle today, Epistle 29 of Iggeres HaKodeshm. We are nearing towards the end of Iggeres HaKodeshm, believe it or not. We have just a few more epistles left until we come to the final portion of the Tanya Kuntras Acharon. So stick with it. It's been an amazing journey. So here we go. Beginning Epistle 29 of Iggeres HaKodeshm. So the Epistle 29 begins with a teaching. The Alter Rebbe starts off with a teaching from the Gemara in Megillah, of chapter 4 of Megillah, where this section of Megillah is actually elucidating upon a portion in a saying in Pirkei Avos, chapter 1, Mishnah 13, which teaches that anybody who uses the crown for personal gain passes away from this world. So the Gemara interprets this to mean, what is the crown? What is this making use of the crown? This is making use of the crown is a reference to the halachos, the laws of the Torah, which are the crown of Torah. And then the Gemara goes on to say that it was taught in the school of Eliyahu that whoever studies halachos is guaranteed a place in the world to come. Okay, so this is the introduction to our epistle today. So to our section today. So basically, there's something very valuable about halachos, that on the one hand, they're called the crown. And in being called the crown, first of all, it's like you shouldn't use a crown for personal gain, right? So you shouldn't use the halachos for personal gain. And if you do, God forbid, if a person does this, then they're liable for death, basically. And if a person, and on the other hand, if a person studies these halachos, seemingly with a good intention, then they are guaranteed a place in the world to come. So what is it about these halachos that make them so special? And to expand upon this question, the Alter Rebbe brings another teaching, this time also from the Gemara in Masechet Menachos, chapter 11, page 99b, where it talks about where it teaches that even if a person studies just one chapter in the morning and one chapter at night, then they fulfilled their obligation in studying the Torah. And it's understood in the Gemara that a reference to this studying one chapter in the morning, one chapter at night, is specifically talking about the Mishnah, specifically talking about the oral Torah, which is an elucidation of the laws, again, about the halachas. So the Alter Rebbe asks a question: why specifically the Mishnah? Why is it that you fulfill your obligation through learning this section of the oral Torah, as opposed to other Torah subjects, like learning like Chumash, for example? So like Torah is not just made up of the Mishnah and like the laws of the Torah, but there's stories of the Torah that we learn and things like that. So why specifically is it concerning the laws? So the Alter Rebbe says that it's known that there's a teaching from the Arizal that every person needs to come back in many different reincarnations until they fulfill all of the 613 mitzvos of the Torah in thought, speech, and action. So basically, so we have this idea, right, that we're all supposed to keep the 613 commandments of the Torah as a Jew, but this doesn't always happen. It's like we're not perfect people, right? And we try our best, but chances are we're probably going to be lacking. And so what happens is that a soul has to come back in over and over and over again in order to eventually complete all of the 613 commandments. And what this does is this completes the garments of their soul, and to rectify them so that they won't have any garment that's incomplete. So as we've learned about previously in the Tanya, we talked about this, how the mitzvahs serve as garments for the soul. And so if we want to have a complete set of garments, we don't want to be like lacking in any part of our garments. We need to do all of the commandments. And in order to do this, we have to come through many reincarnations. We need to be reborn many times. And the Alter Rebbe does give a caveat for this. He says this doesn't include the mitzvahs concerning a king, because there's certain of these 613 commandments, some of those mitzvahs only apply to a king, and it wouldn't be practical for everybody to be reincarnated at some point as a king. Like that just wouldn't be practical. So the way that this works is that the king, when he does his commandments, he is yotze. He includes within all of him all of the Jewish people when he does this. So it's like the king's commandments are taken care of by the king. But all the other commandments, we need to do them. And so thus we need to be reincarnated many times. And the reason for this is in order to have the 613 aspects of a person's, the power of their soul, to have them be fulfilled and not have them be lacking in any way. And the need for these garments and the reason why they're so important is explained in the Zohar. It's elucidated upon the Zohar, and it's understood for any thinking person. So anybody who really thinks about it, anybody who really studies these ideas will understand why it's so important that the soul needs to wear all of these garments. Why? And now the Alter Rebbe is going to explain this a little bit. He says because. And this is where we're going to get into the sunglasses analogy. So pay attention to that. So basically, we know that there's three basic components of a person's soul, like as it's found within the body. So there's the nefesh, the ruach, and the neshama, as we've spoken about, right? So the nefesh, ruach, and neshama levels that are found within these created people. So yes, these are soul levels, but nevertheless, these are creations by God. These are things that God created. And so yes, it's true that God shines his light from his blessed light, and he emanated this in a way of this emanation goes down many different degrees through hishtalshelus, it's called in Hebrew, from level to level to level, and goes through many tzimtzumim, many contractions, many intense contractions, and many garments, vestments that are very intense, as is known to people who study Kabbalah. Like we've spoken about these different levels many times, and to the point that it's called in the Idra Rabbah as se'ar, as hairs. So it's like that God's emanation comes down. It gets so diluted in a sense. It gets so contracted and constricted to the point that it's thought of as like hairs. That it's just like these little bits are coming down. As it says in Daniel, in chapter 7, verse 9, that the hair of his head is like white wool. So this is a reference to this radiance that comes down like the hair of the head. And nevertheless, even though it's such a small radiance that comes down, the nefesh or the ruach or the neshama cannot endure this light. It's too intense for them because it's very good and sweet, as it's called. And where do we see that it's called good and sweet? This is actually written in Tehillim, chapter 27, verse 4, where it says, L'chazot b'noam Hashem, so to behold the pleasantness of God. So this is referring to this idea of God's radiance being pleasant and sweet, and it's talking about this intensity of the light. And also it says in Yeshayahu chapter 58 verse 14, Az titanag al Hashem, then you will delight yourself in God. And also in Yeshayahu chapter 58 verse 11, and he will sate your soul with a pleasurable thirst. So this idea of pleasurable thirst, this is related to the idea of tzichay tzama, which is like a thirst that cannot be sated, as it talks about in the Zohar. So meaning to say, so what are all these citations a reference to is the idea that the soul does not have the ability to, as spiritual it doesn't have the ability to absorb the sweetness and the pleasantness of this thirst, without becoming totally nullified, just like a flame of a candle would become nullified in a torch. So basically, like, it's like if you were to take a candle and you were to shine it into like a bonfire or something like that, the flame of the candle would disappear, right? It wouldn't have any existence anymore, because the bonfire flame overwhelms it. So it's the same thing here, is that the soul, as spiritual as it is, and in fact, because it's so spiritual, because it comes from God, the light of God, like, it can't absorb the light of God because it's too overwhelming. It would just overpower it and it wouldn't exist anymore. And so how does it happen? How are our souls able to absorb this light? This is where this light needs to come down and needs to send down a very small radiance, and it needs to go down through these levels, through many contractions, as we spoke about, until the point that it actually creates this kind of garment that is sort of like the light itself, so that the soul can then derive pleasure from this radiance, and will be able to understand this radiance on a certain level and absorb this radiance without becoming nullified in its source. So it's a weird thing. Basically, what the Alter Rebbe is saying is that the only way that to overcome this hurdle of the fact that, like, the soul is going to become too overwhelmed in the light of God, then God has to create a garment that is going to be actually made up of kind of the same substance. It's kind of going to be like a sort of semblance, have a sort of semblance to this initial light, but that will serve at the same time as a garment for the soul to receive this light. So how can we understand this? So the Alter Rebbe says that we can understand this through somebody looking at the sun, but the way that they look at the sun is through a certain kind of clear glass. So what came to mind for me is like sunglasses, when you look at sunglasses. So it's weird, right? Because it's like, you think about sunglasses, like you think about glass. What is glass doing? The purpose of glass is that it's translucent. It allows you to see through. It's see-through. But at the same time, this very glass, which is a see-through glass, that the purpose of the glass is to see, actually helps you see in a way that's not overwhelming. And the Alter Rebbe brings another example of this, is that we see that with Moshe Rabbeinu, in Shmot chapter 24 verse 18, where it says Vayavo Moshe b'toch ha'anan vayal chulei, that Moses entered the midst of the cloud and he ascended the mountain. So it's like, basically what happened there is that, like, when Moshe went up to receive the revelations on Har Sinai, he vested himself in a cloud, and then he received, that's how he was able to receive all of this radiance from Hashem, is that it was being absorbed through a cloud. So if you think about a cloud, what is a cloud, right? It's just made up of air. It's like, it's not, there's nothing there. There's nothing substantial. It's not like we see clouds, but the cloud is just condensed air. So in this condensation, that condensation allowed him to absorb God, but yet the condensation isn't actually concealing anything in a real way. So that's kind of similar to this idea of how it is that that our souls are able to absorb God's light. And the Alter Rebbe concludes, and he said that this is explained in the Zohar, in the second part of the Zohar on page 210 and 229. So that's the end of the section today, and we're going to continue along these lines tomorrow and continue with this idea. But as we'll see, is that, so with this whole analogy of the sunglasses and the cloud and all that kind of stuff, and the garment that's made up of the light itself, so it's sort of like this paradoxical kind of garment, what is that for us and our relationship with God? This is the mitzvos. These are the Torah laws. And that's why studying and doing these Torah laws is so essential to us being connected to God, to our source, and so essential to, like, we need it. Our souls need it in order to subsist in a complete way. Just like when you walk outside and it's a really sunny day, you need to put on those sunglasses. So that's it for today. And again, we will continue along these lines tomorrow, and I will speak to you then. Thanks for listening to the It Is Taught podcast, hosted by Sarit Switzer. This podcast is dedicated in loving memory of my maternal grandfather, Avraham Yitzchak ben Binyamin HaKohen of blessed memory. Music by Shoshana. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the show, please share it with others and subscribe on YouTube, Apple iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure to leave us a 5-star review. To find out more about the It Is Taught project, including more information on my soon-to-be published book, please visit our website, itistaught.com. To catch the latest from me, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Looking forward to speaking with you tomorrow, and until then, have a great day.